The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday. Unusual day for a show, I know. Sunday, we have our AMA and have my panel, although panel's thin. I don't know. Adam and Jacob are here. Maybe some other people will join us over time. So that means plenty of time for Super Chat questions. If you guys want to ask Super Chat questions, they are available. And people haven't gotten back home from church yet, and as a consequence, have not tuned in to the Yaron Brook Show. Bruce has just joined. Okay, so slowly they are coming, one at a time. I think we'll get a few more over time. So let's see. Anything I want to tell you before we start? I posted this on Twitter, but Trump finally made an appointment that actually got me positively excited. So finally made an appointment that's actually good. Now, hopefully he'll be given the tool and the ability to do it, and that is to do everything he needs to do. That's Chris Wright has been appointed Energy Secretary. As I told you, energy will be the one area that Trump will get, will do some good. And that's because Alex Epstein has massive influence over some people over there, I think. And Chris Wright is, how should I put it? An amazing entrepreneur, has been in a variety of different energy companies, including nuclear, is in oil and gas, is part of the fracking revolution, and is a student of Alex's content, and a huge supporter, I think, of Alex's content, and has stood up and has talked about it, and really, basically a really good guy. And I think together with the Interior Secretary, which was Bogdan. Now, a proper government, let's just to be clear, would have no Interior Secretary and no Energy Secretary. Those functions would be 100% privatized. But given that we have them, the two guys are about as good as they get. Chris in particular is very, very strong, knowledgeable. Other people I know who are knowledgeable in energy really praise him and really excited by him. It should be super interesting, and that will be one positive thing. Let's see. All right, so let us start with a panel. Of course, Super Chat is available. You can ask questions about anything, anything on your mind. I'm sure a lot of you are unhappy with my views on Trump and his cabinet, so ask about it, challenge me. But let's start with Jacob.
Hey, Yaron. I think I figured out RFK's plan for health is to increase the cost of food so much that everyone loses weight because it's too expensive. But my question was, I've experienced this with my brother who's a lawyer. How do you respond when you're talking or dealing with people that can win arguments just because they have such good like verbal IQ or ability to pivot on words or like twist the language to win? And you may look back on it 30 minutes later and like where you say, I should have said this, I should have said that, but the argument's already passed. And same things happen at work during work meetings. How would you deal with that or prepare yourself?
Well, I mean, it really does depend on the context. I think first of all, you've got to accept the fact that some people are not worth arguing with. and that people who tend to do that tend to be somewhat dishonest. They're not listeners. They don't listen. And they've just got their their smart bobs or their smart comebacks, but they're not really interested in the debate. And I'm not sure those people are worth arguing with. Now, in a work context, it's going to really depend. I mean, if it's your boss, then it's a problem. Right? You're not going to. It sounds like you're not going to convince him, and you're going to have to find a way around in order to make your argument, or wait until you get a new boss, or whatever. But it's difficult. Or if you think there's more honesty there, then you could 30 minutes later come back and say, look, I gave what you said some thought, but what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And that, I think, generally is a good tactic. And what will happen then is, if they're honest, then they'll consider it, and maybe they'll be a little distant from the debate and give it some consideration. So that is a possibility. That also, so coming back at them with that, if you think it's worth it, like in a work environment, it probably is. In a personal environment, it might not be. If it's a colleague, again, I would try to, if you're feeling that that's where it's heading, that you're just in a sense trapped into this argument that is not going to go anywhere because they're just being too smart, in quotes, then I would just back off of it and re-engage another time, or re-engage in writing, just to cool it down and to slow the pace of it.
Yeah, I think it's mostly, usually we come in the next day and you look at results from the previous and assign action plans. And rather than try and get to the root of the problem, it's how can person A, or their leadership team is pretty messed up at the site, but how can we assign accountability or shift blame to another person? And some of the times I can redirect the conversation and say, this is the root cause, this was the issue, and I need you to follow up on it. Whereas the other times they'll throw in terminology that's popular in the company and start shifting around the issue to protect themselves or assign work to other people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the important things in these kind of contexts is, and this is something that's important in terms of corporate culture, is particularly when you're trying to fix a problem, is to say, we're not doing blame right now. It's not about we can do that later in my office. We can analyze it, and we can figure out who is to blame. But this is not about blame. This is about solving a problem. And I want solutions. That's all I want. I don't want to know who did what. And now that might work with some people, it won't work. And some people, it's almost impossible to get around the kind of argumentation. But anybody who's immediately trying to assign blame for everything, that is not productive. And that is, particularly in the heat of we're working on this problem, that is very not useful, right?
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And to the extent that you can get there, you can get them to not talk about who it was, but what it was, what actually happened, and how do we fix it, then I think you're moving in the right direction. Hopefully that's helpful. Thanks, Jacob. Adam.
Yes. With regard to the outer circle of Xi's offense against civilization, namely Iran, Russia, North Korea. Obviously, China cannot go directly against America because they would lose most of their economy if they did that. But in the specifics, they do organize cooperation between those powers. And I see the transport of Libyan and Syrian terrorists through the Belarus border into the European Union as very much a part of the long-term strategy of dismantling the rights of people in civilized countries. And last time you said, well, they'd have cheaper ways of transporting terrorists to Europe than going through Belarus. And I would say to that, if you train someone in the skills needed to improvise a lethal weapon on the spot, that person is too valuable to risk to drowning in the Mediterranean. It's costly to transport people all the way from Libya and Syria to the Belarus border.
Yep.
And I think that this is done deliberately to destabilize the condition of individual rights in the civilized world.
Yes. So I don't think that China's behind all this. I really don't. I mean, and I don't think that that's sophisticated. And I think that you're giving the bad actors here too much credit in terms of their ability to plan long-term and to really think this through. I think that what's happening in Belarus is driven by Russia, not by China. It seems completely KGB-like, and the kind of thing the Russians would do. Less to stabilize individual rights. I don't think they think in those terms, but just I think what Russia thinks about is destabilize. How do we create havoc in Europe? How do we just get them at each other's throats? I think they do that with their disinformation campaigns. They do that with, the different sabotage of different properties in Poland and Germany and Northern Europe. I think they try to do it at the border with Finland, and the Finnish shut that down pretty quickly. They're trying to do that with the Belarusian border. This is really a Russian kind of way of doing things. I think for China, I don't think China's ready for a confrontation with the West. I don't think China quite wants yet the destabilization to happen. I think in a sense, Putin is running out probably ahead of where China would like him to be. If anything, I think the Chinese will have done what they could to try to rein him in, but Putin is not very good at being reined in. And I think, for example, I don't think the Chinese want a conflict in the Korean Peninsula, which would force them to get involved. So they're trying to rein in the North Koreans. But again, Russia's running ahead. So while Russia and North Korea and Iran all in the end depend on China, I don't think China's guiding them. I don't think China had anything to do with October 7th or with Iran's decision to bomb Israel. I think those were Iranian decisions made, and the Chinese would probably say, why now? Now's not a good time. You should have waited until we're stronger, and then we could have hit them on another front. We could have invaded Taiwan maybe, or done something else. So I just don't see it as that coordinated between the four parties. I think these leaders are all egomaniacs. They all think they can make decisions by themselves. And if anything, Xi is probably trying to rein them in a little bit in order to fit into his timeline, which is probably different than their timeline. And in terms of the terrorists in Belarus, I think Russia is probably spending a lot of money to do it, because they realize how big of a deal immigration is. The more immigration becomes an issue in Europe, the more these right-wing political parties will rise. these right-wing political or left-wing political parties. Like in Germany, the left-wing political party is very anti-immigration. I forget her name, named after this woman, and they are all friends of Putin. So the right and the left are friends of Putin. And what he wants to make sure is that you don't get the center. You don't get center right. You don't get center left. You don't get anything towards liberty. And any kind of destabilization, any kind of threats, any kind of mayhem in the streets works in Putin's favor. And maybe in Xi's long term. But look, Xi right now wants to sell electric cars to Europe. I think that's more important to him than anything else right now. And he's not happy with the fact that because of a lot of this anxiety around Europe has put in tariffs again vis-a-vis electric cars and trying to be he would have liked things to stay calmer for longer so that he can dominate certain markets to such an extent that Europe and America depended on him, and then he can become a lot more aggressive. That's my interpretation.
Well, on the last point, I would say that what's keeping him from being militarily aggressive is the prospect of losing those markets if his military acts. But if he loses those markets because they impose tariffs, then this is no longer an important factor in the game, and he may well let his military loose.
It's all going to be really interesting because I really do think that the Trump administration has the potential to kind of drive China into a corner where it feels like it has nothing to lose and therefore unleash the military. I think the other thing that worries him is that the military will lose. Now, there's a chance that Trump won't respond to an invasion of Taiwan. He's indeed said so in some interviews. So it's going to be an interesting 4 years. We're not going to lack for drama, guys. It's going to be interesting. I don't know. There's stories on Twitter, but I don't know if this is true. I don't know. It's I hate to say this because it's hard to tell, but there's stories about Khamenei in Iran being on life support, and stories about statues of Khamenei and Khomeini being torn down from government buildings, and a popular uprising in Iran. I'm skeptical about whether this is real. I don't know, but it is something to watch just in case it is real. A big billboard with Khamenei's picture is just being torched a few hours ago. That's good news. We need some good news, right? Khamenei dying, definitely good news. The Iranian people in an uprising, amazing news, right? I mean, really, really good news. Khamenei can be replaced, but if the Iranian people are rising up, then maybe he gets replaced by somebody friendly. So anyway, something to watch. Keep an eye out. Okay, thanks, Adam. Bruce.
Yeah, I think you just covered my well, in part. I was interested in is what you thought Iran's options were now that they can't count on the Biden policies going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that assuming these rumors are not right, I think that okay. General McMaster, who used to be Trump's, but all these rumors are like almost a day old, 10, 12 hours old. And I did read from one reliable source that all of these unconfirmed. But according to General McMaster, supposedly Iran's going to announce the death of Khamenei because he's in a coma any minute now, or replacement of Khamenei any time now. But it still hasn't happened. What are Iran's options? Well, I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, I still think that Trump's first instinct with Iran is going to be to negotiate. I mean, if rumors were right last week, Elon Musk met with the Iranian ambassador to the United Nations. I don't know if that's true. Again, it is not being verified, although Iranian sources say it's true. So hard to tell, but we didn't get any confirmation from the Americans. I wouldn't be surprised. I think that would be step one in the negotiations. And somebody like Elon Musk, who's not part of the American government yet, not formally anyway, and to start feeling out the Iranians, and Iranians would take a meeting with Elon, and so I think the Iranian regime will probably vie for a deal. I think Trump will go for a deal. What kind of a deal is hard to tell, but my guess is going to be that the Iranians would, they'll probably get. They'll get what they want, which is what they want is a dramatic easing of the sanctions on them, economic sanctions. And I think at this point they're willing to make their nuclear program negotiable. They certainly were with Obama, and Trump wants a tougher deal, but whether he'll get a tougher deal, I don't know. But I think there's a deal coming. I think Iran has no choice but to recognize the fact that Hezbollah is finished. So the number one proxy in the Middle East, the number one force in the Middle East is finished. They don't have any leverage over Israel. Their investment of many, many billions of dollars in Hamas and Hezbollah is basically being wiped out by the Israelis. The assets, all the missiles and missile launchers and tech and drones and tunnels are all gone. And they're starting, if they want to create a new Hezbollah, which I'm sure they do, it's going to take 10, 20 years, and they're going to need money. And they don't have money right now. They are, the economy is very poor. The people are not happy with the regime. They have to get rid of these sanctions. So I think they turn to the Trump administration to negotiate. And they cut a deal. And, it turns out, by the way, I don't know if you guys read this, but it turns out that on that strike that Israel did in October, they actually did strike a nuclear facility. So there was a secret nuclear research facility in Iran that they did destroy. And the reason they did it is because it's secret. So the Iranians could never admit that they struck it. So they could still claim, the Israelis, we didn't do anything nuclear. We didn't do the nuclear stuff, to the Biden administration. Now, the Biden administration, of course, would know because they have satellites. But it looks like they did do that. Iran is completely vulnerable. They're completely vulnerable, not to America, to Israel. Israel could wipe them out. And they know that. And I think their best path, and I think the path they'll take, is you'll start seeing, maybe if Khamenei dies, if Khamenei really is dying, then I think the first action of the new president, it might be his son, not president. President is way too much credit for them. Supreme leader. I love that term. I want to be supreme leader. Can I be the supreme leader of the Yaron Brook Show? So I think the supreme leader, who might be Khamenei's son, will, one of his first acts will be to open negotiations with the Trump administration over a nuclear deal and a freeing up of sanctions. That's my view. Military options off the table, not because of Biden or Trump. I think the military option was off the table even if Biden won. The reality is that with no air defense systems, without Russia being able to provide them with new defense systems in time, with the United States under Biden, give him credit, having, six B-52s on the ground in Qatar, Iran was not going to do anything substantial. They were petrified. Even a Biden. But that's because they're so exposed. And even if it's not Biden, Israel could literally, they could fly. I mean, there were pictures today of Israeli jets flying over Syria during the day. Israel has nothing to worry about in terms of their defenses anymore in Syria and in Iran. I mean, imagine what that frees them up to do. They could be doing in Tehran what they've been doing in Beirut the last few months, just knocking them out one by one. They're too afraid. The Iranians are too afraid for that. So they will vie for an agreement. And they'll try to get money through trade and they'll try to get whatever assets are still unfrozen, and they'll probably promise never to support Hezbollah, never to support Hamas, and never to support the Houthis, but what they'll actually and Trump will say, you see, I came in and we got peace. I cut a deal. Everything's great. America's great again. And everybody will be happy. And, 20 years from now, we'll have to fight the same war over again.
So
I hope not, because I think the Iranian people might rise up against them before then.
I certainly hope so. What remains for Israel then on its various fronts now that the Hezbollah leadership has collapsed, and it seems like it's just cleanup for Hamas and Hezbollah at this point.
I mean, Hezbollah is still firing 100 rockets a day into Israel. That's much better than the doomsday scenarios, which said it would be 1,000 to 10,000 a day. 80% plus of the inventory of rockets that Hezbollah had has been destroyed. So there is some cleanup in terms of destroying the remaining missiles. I think the other thing that's going to happen is what Israel would like is a deal in Lebanon. What Israel would like, if the Israelis are thinking long term, and you never know with the Israelis, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, then what they want now is to keep hammering at Hezbollah to the point where the Lebanese step in and say, okay, enough's enough. We're willing to dismantle Hezbollah. We're willing to guarantee that Hezbollah will never have weapons again. And we're willing to cut a peace deal with Israel that basically demilitarizes southern Lebanon or puts Lebanese army there, but demilitarizes it basically, southern Lebanon. And let's have a long-term deal with Israel, maybe a peace deal, maybe something similar to that. And now we're ready to appoint a president. Lebanon hasn't appointed a president a few years now because they couldn't come to an agreement. But we're ready to put a Christian at the head of as the presidency. That's traditionally, not traditionally, by constitution, it has to be a Christian. We're ready to form a government, and a government that is willing to talk to Israel and is basically guaranteeing that there will not be a military presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon. That would be huge. I think that's why there's a lot of talk of a ceasefire, but Israel is not accepting any because they want to push Lebanon to the point where they're just ready to turn their backs to Hezbollah completely. And then on the side of Hamas, the big issue there's the hostages. They still have 100 hostages. Granted, 50% of them at least are probably dead, but they probably have 40 to 50 live hostages, maybe fewer, who knows. And Israel has to figure out a way to get them. And that might be through some kind of deal, but it's not clear Hamas wants a deal, or it might be through military action. I know there's a big meeting today in Israel between the military chiefs and the new defense minister to talk about options in terms of the hostages. But yeah, they need to get the hostages back. That is the key. Once they get the hostages back, then it's just clean up. And then they need a solution for Gaza. That's the next step. What do you do with Gaza now? And they have no clear-cut solution for Gaza. So they need to figure that one out. Iran, I think if they cut a deal with Trump, is off the table, so they don't have to worry about Iran. If Iran cuts a deal with Trump, then the Houthis will stop, and you're back to kind of a relatively peaceful status quo. Although the Palestinian question will still haunt Israel, and they'll still have to figure out a solution for it. Thanks, Bruce. All right, Alejandro.
Hello. So I actually had another question completely unrelated to foreign policy, I guess. So, personally, maybe I'm a little bit of a Scott person in the sense that I don't consider myself objectivist, but I consider myself an Ayn Rand fan, but I still like your show a lot. And so my question was on actually welfare. And so I was wondering why, if you, for example, say you'd have like a private system that provides, for example, for sick kids or something like that, and everyone would kind of fund it. What is wrong with having kind of like a limited or maybe a small welfare program just for like these specific things, maybe through the government or something like that.
Because one is voluntary and one is not. So the principle here is the principle of force. Through the government means coercion. It means I get to fund sick children, even if I don't want to fund sick children. And I have to fund sick children, even if my child is sick and I need all the money to pay for his surgery. I have to fund other people's sick children. It basically removes choice from me, and it coerces me to do something. So by the way, and look, the other aspect of this, so that's the principle. The principle is no coercion, no forcing people to fund things that they might choose not to fund. And once you violate that principle, okay, we just want a tiny little, really small welfare state that funds sick children. Yeah, but what about poor children? What about children that could get sick because they're poor? Should we fund them? I mean, it's just, again, another little small thing, just a little bit of money, not a lot. Well, wait a minute, but if we're funding these sick children and these almost sick children who might get sick one day, what about the adults who are really poor and because of their poverty can't take care of their children? Shouldn't we fund poor parents? Well, but if you're not a parent and if you're not married, you're single, how are you going to find a mate if you're this poor? Maybe the government should fund single poor people so that they can actually get a mate and have kids, so we can have lots of kids in our society. There's no end to the amount of redistribution you will get, which is where we are today. We're basically redistributing everything to everybody. Everybody gets a redistribution. Even I, who don't need your money, am going to get it, right? I get it when I send my kids to public schools. I get it when I go on Medicare. Which I have no choice but to go on Medicare. You can't opt out of Medicare. There's no such thing. I get it when I get my Social Security. I'm getting your money. So you go from, oh no, it's just the neediest of the needy. We promise we'll never. But this is the case in morality and in politics and in real life. Slippery slopes exist. They really, really, really do. This is why you have to act on principle. No redistribution of wealth, no coercion in society, no force. And then if you want to help sick children, fine. If you want to help sick adults, fine. If you want to help sick Martians, fine. You get to choose who to help. And if there's not enough money to help them, then they won't be helped. And that's life. But to force me at gunpoint to help them, that is a violation of principle and completely unacceptable. And once you do that, all rights are out the window.
But I guess on the practical side, you couldn't just say something like, for example, have an objective standard. Like, for example, biology, you could say like, if you get cancer, we can help you. But if you're just like lazy and don't want to work, because from, I guess, my perspective,
but that's how it used to be. That's how it used to be. And it kept getting looser and looser and looser and looser. And then we got it. But look, you can't set a standard for when it's okay to beat me up. It's okay to beat Yaron up if there's a child dying, but it's not okay to beat Yaron up if it's not a child, he's already 16 and he's adult and he's dying. Then it's not okay to beat Yaron up. You can't beat me up. Beating me up is wrong. It's immoral. It's unjust. I didn't cause the kid to get cancer, and yet you're making me responsible for his cancer. So if you can't beat me up because the kid has cancer, then how dare you take my money? My money is my life. My money is my work. My money is my time. That's like beating me up. I'd rather you beat me up than take my money. Right? So you can't have, I'm going to have a principle to violate your principle. It just doesn't work that way. I'm going to have an objective standard. But there is no objective standard for when it's okay to beat me up. And I'm purposefully making it beat me up because I know you don't want to beat me up, Alejandro. But that's the essence of taxation. It's beating me up. It's beating me up by majority vote, but it's still beating me up.
Interesting. Well, I guess I'd have to think about that.
Right.
I guess
Try not paying taxes. Let's say in your system, we got the poor dying cancer kid fund, and I don't want to pay it. I don't want to pay it. And what do you do to me? You beat me up. You physically remove me from society and put me in jail. Right? That's what you do to people who don't pay taxes. So I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's moral. I think it's immoral to use physical force because you have a social cause that you think is more important than my life. But it's not. My life is the most important thing to me. I get to decide which sick kids I get to help and which sick kids I don't. Like, how about this? Sick kids dying from cancer in the United States? What about sick kids dying from cancer in Canada? Should I help them? Or in Africa? Or in Mexico? Why not? Does the border change the morality of not helping them? There's no end to it. But again, the principle is can't beat me up. Can't use force against me. That's the principle. So no welfare, no coercion. We want to live in a society, and this should be pretty straightforward. Everybody should be cheering us on. I want to live in a society where no force is used against anybody, period. And if you and your friends want to help somebody, you can help whoever you want or not. But I don't have a right to force you to help anybody. That's the society I want to live in. No force, no coercion. I don't see what's so crazy about that. And it's a principle. So we always know how to enforce it versus the exceptions and all kinds of exception rules and all this other stuff. And then it's not a principle, and then force is okay. And then we can use force on all kinds of things. Taxation is force. It's the initiation of force. All right. Let's see. Let's take some super chat questions. Let's start with Michael. And Michael says, amazing how a guy who had Nick Fuentes over for dinner a year ago is now leader of the free world. Well, yeah, it is amazing. Don't ask me how it happened. I warned you. I warned you guys. The world's also not that free anymore, or getting less free as we speak. Michael, you think you can get on Sam Harris to discuss Trump? He might be afraid of objectivists to challenge his nonsense and free will, but on Trump, he may engage with you. All indications are he doesn't want to talk to me. I can keep trying, but really, I'd have to be obnoxious. Sam doesn't want to engage with objectivists, obviously. So I don't know why. I don't think he's going to change his mind because it's Trump. But I'll try. I'll keep trying. Let's see. Michael also asked, what should the age of consent be for sex? Is 18 rational or too puritanical and Christian? God. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's ridiculous, 18, because I know so many people who had sex before 18 and they're good. Nothing happened to them. Life did not end. So I suspect it's lower, probably around 16. But I think even if it's 18, you'd have to allow for exceptions. That is, you'd have to allow for the teenagers to be able to argue that they're mature enough. And I don't know if somebody want to be, I think it's horrific that an 18-year-old gets prosecuted for sleeping with a 16-year-old. That's just horrible. God, my whole high school would be in jail, I think. So, how you exactly enforce it, how you actually do it, I don't know. But you should be able to have an out. And yeah, I really don't see a problem at 16 starting to, if you will, experiment with sex.
Yaron, would that be the same if it was like a 50-year-old and a 16-year-old? Or is it different if it's like an 18 and 16?
I think there's a difference. And we can kind of sense it. And I think there is. Men usually date younger women for a variety of reasons, particularly when we're teenagers or in their 20s, partially because women mature faster than men. Something about that frontal lobe developing at different rates. But so an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, that's the same level of maturity, right? An 18-year-old guy is the same maturity as a 16-year-old girl. A 50-year-old, there's something strange going on there. And there's much more possibility of coercion, much more possibility of manipulation, because of her innocence and his sophistication, whereas an 18-year-old, not so much. Where's the line? I think it's murky and it's not simple. But I don't think it's clear cut. That is, there has to be some discussion and debate. I remember when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, Don McLean, you remember Don McLean, what's it called, American Pie? I drove my Chevy to the levee and something was gone. Anyway, Don McLean used to come to Israel regularly and give concerts, and it turned out he must have been in his 30s, and he had a 16-year-old girlfriend in Israel. And everybody knew this, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody blinked an eye. Now, if you'd been 15, maybe they would have. There's something... there's certainly an age where, yeah, you should be really, really concerned, right? But I don't know where that age is exactly. You'd need to really think about it psychologically. And the age difference, I don't know where and how much, you want to play into it, right? So... Yeah, but look, our obsession in a culture with sex and our puritanical attitude towards sex is definitely driven by Christianity. There's definitely a puritanical element. On that one hand, on the other hand, there's also a hedonistic element, which are battling each other. There's almost no objective element, objective approach to sex education, whatever you want to call it, today. But I think we're much healthier with regard to sex now than, I don't know, puritanical England of the Victorian times or whatever. All right, Michael asks, has the Republican Party discovered the formula is to move to the left in terms of embracing statism and anti-corporate conspiracies while rejecting the nihilism and anti-patriotism of the left? Well, God, you don't think Trump is a nihilist to some extent? He certainly governs like one, and he certainly has all the characteristics. And you don't think MAGA has a nihilistic streak in it? I think it does. So I think the Republican Party has discovered that the formula is to move left on economic issues and to embrace nationalism, patriotism, nationalism, and I think ultimately religion in its quest for power. So, in other words, you remember how once they said, Ayn Rand said, the left wants to regulate our bedroom, wants to regulate our boardroom and leave us free in the bedroom because they're materialists. And the right wants to regulate our bedroom but leave us free in the boardroom because they're anti-materialists. And now what the right has figured out that actually the best formula is Orban and Putin. Regulate the boardroom and regulate the bedroom, right? Why leave anything? Why leave even a crack for freedom? Now it could be that the Trump administration is going to leave a crack for energy for some reason. For whatever reason, energy is going to be free, but everything else is going to be regulated. We'll see. All right, Darius X-Plane says, is there anything you disagree with Ian on? Any topic, art, economics, strategy? Also, why do you think objectivism failed to become popular? Yeah, there are lots of things in the detail, in the application that I disagree with Ayn Rand on, nothing in philosophy that I disagree with her. But, should the United States have entered World War II or not? Woman president? I don't know. There probably a variety of different things. Art, I don't think we should. I mean, I love Beethoven. She didn't. I probably love Michelangelo's David more than she did. Yeah, lots of things in art, certainly. We have a different, at some level, a different sense of life, and we respond differently to art. I don't disagree with her, though, on artistic theory, and I don't disagree with her on the philosophy. Why do you think objectivism has failed to become popular? Because it's hard, because it's new, because it's challenging, and because religion and its secular spin-offs are so deeply rooted in people's psychology and people's psychoepistemology and people's ideas that they're very, 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 very hard to dislodge. And the only ones that have managed to dislodge religion are the ones that have adopted religion, but in a different guise, like the communists and the fascists, who are religious, just they replace God with a proletarian or with the Aryan race or with the state or with something like that. But they essentially accept the religious epistemology, and they essentially accept the religious ethics. So if you don't challenge religion too much, you can be successful. If you challenge religion, given how deeply it's got its roots into every aspect of the culture, it's very hard. All right, we'll do two more questions here in the super chat, and then we'll go to our panel. Frank says, are Cuba and Venezuela poor because of U.S. embargoes? No. I've answered this question before. No, of course not. That is a completely ridiculous argument. Cuba and Venezuela are poor because they are socialist. Cuba and Venezuela are poor because they have no private sector. Cuba and Venezuela are poor because they nationalized things like farming and the oil industry in Venezuela. You could open up from U.S. embargo, they'd be, and they'd still be poor, right? The only hope, and I'm not for an embargo on Cuba and Venezuela. I don't think we should embargo them. I don't think they constitute a threat to the United States, and I think we should embargo only threatening regimes. But it's not the cause of their poverty. The cause of their poverty is the lack of wealth creation. They just don't create any wealth. And they don't create any wealth because they're authoritarian and violent and deal in coercion. All right, let's go back to our panel. Jacob.
Question, or two quick ones. So I'm headed to Taipei in end of February, early March to visit my girlfriend's parents and where she grew up. Do you think or what should I look for if it's still safe? And then also, I was hopeful on Heg stuff until the Secretary of Defense, until you mentioned all the Christian nationalism, because I thought he was more of a total war, less of a just war theory person. Where do you think in the current culture would you find a good Secretary of Defense? Because when you get higher up in the general ranking, it's more of a political person than an actual military person. But you need someone that has commanded troops. So would you go for like a 30-year veteran that has led a division or two, but didn't want to get political, and that's why he's maxed out his career? Or how would you find a good person for Secretary of Defense?
I'm available. That'd be really good.
You have no chance. Sorry,
No.
I'd vote for that.
Yeah. I think Jacob, I think you hit on it. I mean, I don't know anybody specifically, but I'd look for somebody who had some leadership experience in the military, but didn't rise up to, I don't know, 3-star, 4-star general. So never got involved in the politics of it, but has experience with combat. But then probably somebody who left the military and went on to lead a private organization, to maybe do a startup on Silicon Valley. That would be great. That would be amazing. I'd love to see a startup CEO with military experience be head of the Department of Defense. How about we take the CO, and I don't think he has military experience, but he would be an interesting choice. What if we take the CO Plantier and make him defense secretary? Now, I don't know that much about him, but obviously this guy's built a military defense company that is amazing and world leading in the private sector, and managed to sell stuff to the Pentagon, an organization that is famous for its unbelievable massive bureaucracy. Imagine if you brought an entrepreneurial mindset, that kind of entrepreneurial mindset. Okay, let's sit down and do like a real strategic deep dive. How do we beat China in a war? What are the technologies that we need to develop to beat China in a war? And I'd like to see around that table, I don't know, CEO Plantier, the CEO of this new company, the guy who built Oculus, and sold it to Facebook, and then some other CEOs with defense experience. There's a venture capital fund called Shield that invests in private firms that are developing military technology. I'd like to see the guys from Shield on that committee. And one of those guys should be the defense secretary. I want somebody who will shake up. Like, I think you could fire 50% of the people who work at the Pentagon, uniformed and ununiformed, and have a better military, right? Because most of them are bureaucrats. Paper pushing, shuffling bureaucrats that are there because of the way Congress has written procurement bills, and it's all one huge. I'm reading a fascinating book. I said this yesterday. I'll do a book review of it maybe later this week. I'm about to finish it, called Unit X. Highly recommend it. You should all read it. It's about venture capital, startups, and military technology. And you need somebody who can think strategically and who can bring a private sector perspective, but has knowledge of the military. So here's the criteria. Somebody who's led troops, ideally in battle, then worked in Silicon Valley in a startup or hedge or venture capital fund. Though that there probably, I don't know, 10 people like that in the whole country. I'd find the 10 of them, interview them, and get the best one of them. That's not bad. I like this. I like that strategy. I just came up with it. Sounds good to me. What do you think, Jacob?
I like it, especially with the anti-drone technology for the laser coming out of Israel. I think that'll make a big change.
Yeah, it's anti-drone. It's which will take drones off the table. But what is the next technology? And look what the Ukrainians did in the Black Sea. They're basically taking over the Black Sea with drone ships. These little boats that are drones, and there are drone submarines now. And we're going to have robot soldiers, and AI is going to guide so much of what happens in battle. And you need a tech guy. You need somebody who understands tech.
Yep, I agree. And then
who understands battle. So you need somebody who's been on the ground with troops in the craziness of battle, where that, tech is great, but at the end of the day, you also need to be able to have brave troops who are willing to fight hard and willing to do unbelievable things with simple tools like a gun in their hand. So you need that combination of a warrior, a commander, and a tech-savvy individual. And again, there are not that many people like this in the world, but there are a few.
Yeah, and then for closing, your thoughts on Taiwan and would you visit?
I would visit. I wouldn't worry about Taiwan. I don't think war is imminent with Taiwan. And I think there'll be a lot of saber rattling, not rattle sabering, saber rattling before it happens. So you will know if this is a threat. I mean, think about even Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, for 2 months, we kind of knew what was happening. Now, I admit I got that one wrong. I predicted Putin would never do it. And he did. But you still had the saber rattling. So I think you'll have it with Taiwan as well. So I wouldn't worry about it at this point. And the reality is China doesn't want to carpet bomb Taiwan. They want Taiwan whole. They want the people. They want TSMC. They want their intellectual, the intellectual capital, the engineers, the people. They want it whole. That's part of why they're delaying. They don't want to completely destroy Taiwan. They don't want to nuke Taiwan. They could tomorrow. They want Taiwan to be part of China. They really think that's their goal and their mission, and they can't achieve that yet, right? Politically or through military force. So I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
Enjoy. I've never been to Taipei. I'd like to go someday.
Yeah, are you going to go there while you're in Australia? It's really close.
No, I'm going to Tokyo.
I got you.
Yeah, Tokyo is somebody who's we're doing an event in Tokyo, and plus that'll be 3 weeks on the road, and I need to get home. But I'm hoping one day to go to Taipei. I'm hoping to Taiwan, and don't know when. Probably never going to go to China again, which is kind of sad. But but I'd like to go to Taiwan. All right, Adam.
You're muted, Adam.
There you go.
I'm okay. One thing that is different now from Ayn Rand's day is that back in Ayn Rand's day, it took government action to either monopolize or interfere with free speech. But what we've seen since then is that there are regimes, Hungary comes to mind, where essentially the government's security apparatus has authorized private criminals to keep speech and business under control so that the government can create monopolies indirectly by cooperation between private crime outfits that do the enforcing of anti-monopoly, anti-free speech regulation, and so on. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I basically think that's right. I think that what has happened in Hungary is that they have found ways for the government to do the censoring, but to do it in a shady kind of way where they can't find a direct link to the government. So all the people who own all the media in Hungary now are Orban's friends, quote, friends in parentheses, you know. So these are the oligarchs. These are the Putin-like, friends of Putin. These are the people who are close to the regime and get power. Now, you can't compete with them because the government will step in and create all kinds of obstacles for you if you want to compete. I actually have the Black Book of Hungary. Do I have that? It's here. Yeah, this is called the Black Book 2, right? It's called Corruption and State Capture in Hungary. And it's published by Civitas Institute and Transparency International. They're based in Hungary. So these are the opposition in Hungary. I gave a talk in Hungary for them a year or two ago in Budapest. And yes, I mean, the government basically controls it. And they control kind of a kind of a mafia. It's the same in Russia. When you have private armies that the government basically, where the leaders of the private armies are beholden to the authoritarian in charge, Putin, you basically control everything. So yes, there are new forms of authoritarianism. There are new forms of authoritarianism expressing itself in the real world that we have to watch and we have to monitor. That doesn't, become a standard in the West, and we don't just roll over. Clearly, there's no free speech in Hungary. If you try to set up a media company that's in competition, they will find a way to shut you down, and it will ultimately be the government. It's not, so yes, I agree. I agree with you completely.
should we stop using the very quick dismissal where we say, well, this cannot be a monopoly because only governments can set up monopolies, when the government nominally complies with the European Union laws on what governments are not allowed to do because they outsource it to criminal organizations that are nominally private.
I mean, I think we need to be careful. I wouldn't stop using the term, but I would say if there's reason to believe otherwise, then make the argument, make the case. But somebody has to make the case for it. So if you make the case that the regime is doing this and that is provable, then yeah, then they're doing it, and they're creating a monopoly. But the burden of proof is on those who claim it, and I certainly don't think there's free speech in Hungary or in Russia or in Belarus. So, but I think that we still have it in U.S. and Europe, for the most part. It's under attack, particularly in Europe.
I want to add that we have many advocates of antitrust in the Trump administration, and recently Elon Musk, the great inventor, has added Microsoft to his antitrust case against OpenAI.
Well, because Microsoft is a big investor in OpenAI, so it makes sense. But yeah, I mean, using antitrust to intimidate companies is what Congress, both parties, have used for a long time now. They did it to Facebook. They did it to others. It's very, very, it's very, very bad. And if there's a link directly between that and the kind of speech one can say on the platforms, we should call it out, and that's censorship if it's done directly. And this government, Trump is not going to be friendly to business, to markets and business at all. All right, Bruce. I mean, J.D. Vance is a fan of Lena Khan's. I mean, he said she's doing a great job. Elon Musk doesn't like her, but J.D. Vance really likes her.
Yes, skip me. I'm in a noisy environment. See the Zoom chat for a couple of questions.
Oh, where's the chat? All right, there's the chat. All right, let's see. I actually heard you fine, by the way, so chat. Okay.
It's about to get much noisier.
Okay. Iran's proposal to let the economy rip at 6% growth per year solves poverty in 2 generations, largely removing this issue from the table. The two desire to help the poor must incorporate the solution. Yes, absolutely. Extremely nihilistic, in my opinion. I assume Debbie's talking about the Trump administration, or Trump generally. Yes. And Bruce says, please skip me this round. I'm in a noisy environment. My question would have been on prospects for Ukraine, given that Trump has been reelected. Also on the prospects for a useful Democratic Party during Trump administration. Prospects for Ukraine, I mean, it's a tough one. I don't know. It's going to be very, very difficult for Ukraine. Trump is not going to be supportive. I don't think Elon is going to be supportive. Elon constantly pushed for a negotiated settlement, which really means a Ukrainian capitulation to Russia. I think what you'll see is, again, a deal. You'll get some kind of deal. Putin needs respite. I mean, this war is just crushed the Russians. I mean, something like 600,000 casualties in terms of agent and dead, wiped out their entire arsenal of tanks and other weapon systems. almost the entire arsenal. I mean, they need time to recuperate. So I think Russia is inclined towards a ceasefire. Ukraine won't have a choice because the Americans will basically negotiate for them and force them. The Europeans would like the whole issue just to go away because they've got real problems internally, both economically and politically. And I think Trump will walk in and give Russia much of the territory it holds. They'll get Crimea, they'll get part of Donetsk, maybe all of Donetsk, maybe all of Luhansk. And the Ukrainians will just have to suck it in. And Russians will say, okay, that's fine. We'll accept that. And then they'll rearm. And they'll, the sanctions will be lifted, which is what Russia wants. Russia really, really, really wants to be able to sell its oil on the open market. It really, really, really wants to be able to sell its natural gas on the open market. And they need their assets unfrozen. And they need, just like Iran, they need the money. And once they have the money, they will rearm. They'll invest in latest technology. Maybe they'll buy, I don't know if you saw, China's just unveiled their stealth all-round airplane. It looks exactly like the F-35. You think maybe they had a spy.
It's named the J-35.
Yeah, it's named the J-35. And they actually had a spy working on the project who was arrested ultimately. So it's basically an F-35 knockoff. Hopefully the U.S. is already working on the next generation. But so, they might be able to kind of deal with China to get weapons in exchange for oil and stuff. And you'll face a much, in a sense, a stronger Russia, at least technologically, with the help of China, maybe more explicit this time down the road. So again, Trump is a deal maker and he's looking for deals. And that's the deal he'll cut, and he'll make Russia, lift sanction over Russia, lift sanction over Iran they'll give up something, but nothing major. Nothing major. It's, we're heading into, very, very, very dangerous times. And of course, the consequence of all this will be long-term. They won't be short-term. So nobody will blame Trump. He'll cut deals and everybody will be online saying, see, Iran, I told you so. He's a peacemaker. He's such a great president. Look, he's changed the world and there's no more wars. And what a great guy Putin is. I'm already seeing it online. And when war breaks out in 10 years, because of what Trump did now, everybody will blame the administration of 10 years from now when this happens. And they say, see, there were no wars under Trump. And the same thing happened with Afghanistan. I mean, why did the United States leave Afghanistan the way it did? It's because Trump signed a peace deal with the Taliban. Peace deal. Signature, signed, peace deal. He actually invited them to Camp David to come and sign it. Somebody in the administration said that's a bad idea. Don't have the Taliban land in Camp David. So they didn't sign it in Camp David. They signed it in Qatar. But it was a peace deal between America and the Taliban, which gave Afghanistan to the Taliban. So, but does anybody blame Trump for what happened in Afghanistan? No, nobody. They all blame Biden. You could argue that Trump's friendship with Putin and the fact that nothing was done during the Trump administration about Putin's taking of Crimea and the ongoing hostilities in Donetsk led Putin to ultimately invade, but it was under Biden, so Biden gets the blame for it. Not that Biden's good, it's just anyway. So I think Ukraine's in trouble, and they'll probably have to give up on NATO. They'll probably have to give up on joining NATO as part of the deal. And I don't think Trump has any problem with that because he wants the U.S. to give up on NATO, never mind Ukraine giving up on NATO. Also, on the prospects of a useful Democratic Party during the Trump administration. I mean, the prospects are really bad. Really, really bad. Bernie Sanders, by the way, the other day announced that he is going to be actively working with Donald Trump to impose a cap on credit card interest rates of 10%. This was one of Trump's proposals during the campaign. And Bernie Sanders is excited to be working with the Trump administration. And Josh Hawley, I'm shocked that Josh Hawley would have this position. You all know my opinion on Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley is signing up with Bernie Sanders to sponsor a bill to cap interest rates on credit cards. So I think the far left economically of the Democratic Party is really going to like Trump, except on energy. And the better people in the Democratic Party, I don't know that they can have any power or be able to organize the party around any kind of principles to stand up to Trump. But at this point, I don't know. I hate to say this, and I know I'm going to get flack for it, but it's almost like we might have a better shot changing the Democratic Party than we do a Republican Party. The Republican Party is basically gone. It's Tucker Carlson wackos. It's a bunch of nutty people who believe in demons and want power over every aspect of our lives. And I think the center left now is healthier than the right. Yeah, I just lost 100 subscribers or something. I don't know. Okay, Alejandro. And by the way, Alejandro, don't compare yourself to Scott, please. You're much nicer, much more polite, and you're not an asshole, I think. I mean, Scott is, so you're not Scott.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe I'm actually a student at University of Michigan, so maybe we can continue the conversation next time you come visit.
Well, I'll be in Michigan. This is good. I'll be in Michigan in I think April or March. So if you know anybody is interested in inviting me to come and speak at the University of Michigan, then let me know.
Well, I was told you went to the Young American Foundation and you told them.
But that was not really worth it because, I mean, it was too few people. It was too small of a group.
Yeah. I heard. Yeah. And you told them that you liked iPhones more than cathedrals.
More than what? More than cathedrals. Yeah, they really flipped out over the iPhones over cathedrals bit. But yes, I will double up on. I like iPhones a lot more. I mean, orders of magnitude more than cathedrals.
Well, my question was on history, and I was wondering, what? So, the French Revolution and the American Revolution, on the surface, shared many similar qualities to the point where even someone like Thomas Jefferson went over to the French's side and helped basically start it. So I'm wondering what the discrepancy is philosophically and why they turned out so differently. And maybe if you have a book on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic and it's a big topic, but I would say that the French Revolution started out with, basically good premises. It started out wanting, in many ways, to reflect American Revolution. It started out as a movement to liberate France from authoritarianism, from the rule of the aristocrats and the rule of the monarchy. And the intention was to create a republic. But the philosophical, the philosophy driving the most committed revolutionaries, the people who were most committed to it, ultimately turned out to be not Voltaire and Montesquieu and Diderot and people like that from the French Enlightenment, people who inspired Thomas Jefferson and the American Enlightenment. But it turned out to be Rousseau. And Rousseau is fundamentally a collectivist, not an individualist. Rousseau is fundamentally an authoritarian, not a pro-individual liberty. Rousseau is fundamentally anti-capitalist, anti-any aspect of capitalism, as compared, again, to the rest of the Enlightenment. So Rousseau is the anti-Enlightenment. And the French Revolution was captured. It didn't have to be this way, but it turned out that it was captured by the evil ideology of Rousseau. And I don't know all of Jefferson's reasoning for his support of the revolution. I suspect that he was naive about Rousseau, that he supported it at its beginning because He thought it was a revolution of the Enlightenment, and he confused Rousseau maybe with an Enlightenment figure when he was an anti-Enlightenment figure. So I don't know enough about the history to know why Jefferson supported them. But the American Revolution is fundamentally a revolution of Locke, of John Locke, and of the Scottish Enlightenment, and of the French Enlightenment. It's an anti-Rousseau revolution. It's fundamentally individualistic, pro-individual liberty, and therefore pro-capitalism. So they're completely opposite in terms of how they turned out. But there was a point probably in the French Revolution, again, I'm not an expert, where the French Revolution could have been better. And it wasn't because of the influence of Rousseau.
And then another point on history. I don't know if you got my email after the last Q&A.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was about the talk with Sherman. I just you probably, I guess you never got it. On your website,
Maybe I didn't answer it. I don't commit to answering every email I get.
Oh no, it wasn't. I was just because I was going to ask about it for this Q&A, but maybe you didn't read it. But it's okay. Just on your website, by the way, the contact form doesn't work on your new website.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for letting me know. I'll let my web guy know. Say nothing happens. What happens when you?
Yeah, it just says it's like an error.
Okay, I'll let him know. Tell him to fill it up, to fix it. Thanks. Thanks, Alejandro. Debbie.
Leaving the best for last.
Oh, what's that?
No, nothing.
Your
No,
volume is
first of
really
all,
low. It's hard to hear.
Okay.
Maybe.
Let me
That's better.
me
Whatever you're
try.
doing. Lean forward makes
Okay.
it.
Okay. I also moved something. So anyway, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with your earlier statement that the more moderate, like the Democrat Party, is more likely to be recoverable than the Republicans. I think that they've just really become, and in fact, I think I remember Ayn Rand saying something like in one of her early Ford Hall Forum lectures to that effect, like that something like that the more like moderate liberals are like the potential allies of
Because they still have respect for reason. They still have some respect for reason, whereas MAGA has no respect for reason. It's reason's out.
Anti-reason. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But anyway, that wasn't my question. My question pertains to the topic of femininity and masculinity, which I know you love to discuss.
We'll have to talk about
yeah, sorry. But anyway, basically, I looked up femininity and masculinity in online like dictionary, and they're both defined analogously as qualities or attributes regarded as characteristic of either men and boys or women and girls.
Yep.
And also masculinity is traditionally contrasted with femininity. So it's to say that like if something is within the domain of masculinity, then it is not of femininity. So that is, for that reason, I can sometimes feel troubled by discussions of masculinity as entailing power and strength and decisiveness and independence and leadership, because it kind of sounds like it's implying that those things are absent in femininity. So my question for you is, what do you think femininity is?
Well, the fact that it's absent in femininity, why would that bother you, right? Because you can be a woman who's feminine and masculine, and with masculine attributes. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no contradiction there, right? I mean, Ayn Rand famously took it as a compliment when somebody told her he thought she was a man, right? Because she definitely had masculine qualities. She knew it, right? And she didn't see that as a negative. She saw that as part of it. So, Rand views again femininity as an orientation towards the male, that is, as hero worship. And that was her definition of femininity. The masculinity's orientation towards reality, and femininity's orientation towards the hero. I don't know. I don't fully understand how that works exactly, but I think
Neither do I.
What's that?
And I find it unrelatable. I said, neither do I understand how that works, and nor do I relate to it.
Yes, but again, I think that it doesn't mean that the essence of being a woman is. That is, you can be a woman with, and there are lots of men with feminine attributes, and that doesn't make them less men. It might make them less masculine, but doesn't make them less men. They're still human beings, and we treat people, they're still individuals. So we're all mixtures of these attributes. She was very clear that she saw that women could lead corporations, that women could be entrepreneurs, that women could be scientists. I mean, she was a philosopher. She was one of the few women in all of history that was a philosopher. So clearly her orientation was towards truth and knowledge and reality in that sense. But in her view is in the realm of sex, which is the realm in which femininity and masculinity most manifest themselves, and as a kind of a guide through it all, she viewed femininity as oriented towards hero worship and masculinity oriented towards conquering nature, if you will, right? The conquest of nature. It's a certain psychological, if you will, maybe starting point that boys and girls have, but that develops in a variety of different ways. But it's some kind of starting point. Clearly, they're different. Put it this way. Clearly, there are differences. Certainly, on average, there are major differences between boys and girls. From very young, the differences between boys and girls. The differences. Who's joining us?
Jason's here.
Oh God.
That sounds like bullshit.
My answer. I'm kidding. So
what different? I mean,
what differences?
Where yeah, I mean, no, I mean that's been tested like abundantly, right? And what we find is that, I mean, the kind of results suggest that these children, right, are in societies that are already highly gendered, from the way we dress them as babies, the toys we give them, everything around them, even just the pet names they start to call. I don't think there's any reason to think that, like, why would the fact that you have two X chromosomes and a vagina mean that you're more inclined to worship the one with the XY chromosome and the penis, and the one with the XY chromosome and the penis is more inclined to sort of conquer nature and then be seen by you as conquering nature.
Certainly, if you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous. But of course, that's not what anybody's arguing. I think there is a difference, and I don't think what you're citing as studies is definitive. And if you look at societies that have families that have really tried to isolate their families away from these gender stereotypes, there are differences between boys and girls. I mean, look, there's differences between any two babies. They're major differences. I think the fact that XXXY, differences on the day they're born, the differences on the day they're born, you can tell that they're different human beings. And I don't think the XXXY is a trivial difference. I think it is a significant difference. It has manifestation in the hormones that are brought out, in the physicality, in strength, in the relationship between muscle and fat, in the way the bones and the structure of the bones. All of that manifests differently in males and females from very early
Certainly,
on.
those are physiological.
As adults, I mean, look, but as infants.
But let me finish. But the idea that then doesn't have implications on the conclusions that they come to as children because of the kind of games that they can play. For example, boys can play games that girls cannot. Girls will get hurt if they play the games some boys play.
That's
not
nonsense.
All boys. Some boys would also get hurt. This is the point about it's not being a clear line. And some girls can play those games, but some girls cannot, just because of the physicality of it, just because of the way we are built, and we come to conclusions about the world, about reality, that are different as a consequence of that leads to different outcomes, men and women. And look, I'm not going to defend the hero worship argument because I don't understand it. So I'm not going to defend it. But I am going to defend that there are differences between men and women. And that I think one expression of that is femininity and masculinity. And just we have different orientations. We look at things a little differently. It doesn't change the fact, on average, it doesn't change the fact that reason is accessible to both equally.
Do you buy the idea like that a 5-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, they can't play the same sports or games? I mean, there's no significant difference of muscle mass or anything like that.
Absolutely different. Absolutely.
5-year-olds?
Two girls could keep up with me when I was 5 years old. And, there was some, but it's a small minority.
Well, and just for testosterone, the amount of aggression.
Yeah. We've got just the fact that we've got different hormones are going to affect
puberty. No, I mean, like that. Like
we develop differently.
Look, I believe that by 5, you had already been heavily encouraged to physically perform, and I believe that perhaps in that same society, the girls less so. And I certainly believe that, like, when you hit puberty and when she hit puberty, right, and you started putting on muscle mass, and by the time you're 25, there are significant physical differences, and those significant physical differences then redound into a history of different political, cultural roles. Like, so for example, right, like it'll never not be the case that the average adult man will be able to physically overpower the average adult woman, unless, she carries a gun or something like that. Maybe she should. But so that will have a kind of role, but that role will be sort of downstream in how we learn how to behave. And then those behaviors and tendencies we teach our children.
Girls are going through puberty these days at the age of 9.
The study with the male monkey children it doesn't prove anything.
To argue that has no psychological, they don't come to any conclusion. It doesn't make any difference. It makes no difference. The fact that half of humanity gets a period and half doesn't, that doesn't manifest itself, particularly during teenage, in different behavioral patterns. I think is
but why? No. Oh, sure, it has to, right? But the question isn't, are there biological differences? We are a sexually dimorphous, right, species. That's not the issue. The issue is the various things that you associate with masculinity. Mm-hmm. If you strip them of like the kind of history of power and of certain psychological and certain ethical norms and something like that, does it really make any sense? Why, is there anything about having a period that means that psychologically built into her nature and her natural psychological tendencies, if there even is such a thing, which is sort of very vague and hard to pin down when you think about how much concepts.
But I have to admit that
the point is
I'm talking without the data, right? So what I'm saying is
the data.
But the data doesn't prove what you try to argue it proves. My point is this, that of course it does, right? So the fact that you bleed once a month, particularly when you're very young, it makes you vulnerable, makes it difficult, creates a certain amount of difficulty. The fact that when you grow up and you become, you go through puberty, the fact that you're weaker puts you in a vulnerable position. The fact that men rape women and women don't rape men generally, creates a vulnerability. These things are real vulnerabilities. They're not pretend vulnerabilities, and they have psychological implications. So our difference in physicality, the fact that you can carry a baby and a man cannot, these things have psychological implications. They have to have. There's no way you can have such big physical differences between men and women and not have some spiritual, call it, reflections of that differences in physicality. Now, what they are, I agree with you. We don't know conclusively.
No, but it's not just that. It's all of those, whatever they are incredibly modulated through our concepts and our culture, right? So what if, as soon as a girl was, say 5 years old, we started teaching her how to really wield a machete really well, knowing that there are men out there who are going to try to overpower her. And just as a kind of cultural marker of femininity, everywhere a woman goes, her sword or her machete is prominently displayed, like "Don't tread on me." I think that'd be kind of cool. And
Well,
right,
that's true,
What the
man.
now I
response to
bet
that
you.
would be, Jason? That is, the response of that would be men would start training in bigger machetes, and they would
Yeah.
and they wouldn't fear
I'm
the
just
women.
clean this because I want to have
Well, no,
the
not if you
vacuum run
taught
while we're
men.
going.
Not if you taught
But
men,
it
for
was
example,
filled with
right?
hair.
But it's a
So-
sign of weakness
Yeah.
and a sign of sexual impotency to carry a sword around like that. It shows like you need to try to overpower a woman.
I think
But the point is, right? How would you teach it, right? And if you saw enough of your heroes around you,
Yeah.
and if you grew up with your mother wearing this thing and your father not wearing it, and if your father wears it, it's shameful, and if your mother wears it, it's proud, and all those other things, right? That would be how it would be through that structure that those psychological effects would manifest for you. So the point isn't, yes, there are different hormones. Of course there are, right? There are, and of course there are these physical differences. But all of those physical differences are just prompts for human ingenuity to find some way to deal with them and to create a social structure around them, and to think that, well, they always must imply this way of manifesting being male or this way of performing being female. I think
Well,
is
obviously
to
they
miss
don't.
the role of
But
culture.
they obviously don't always, and I've said, my role model for masculinity is not Conan the Barbarian, right? My role model for masculinity is Steve Jobs, and that's not a traditional, role for masculinity. I think both of these concepts evolve over time. Jacob, yes. Jacob.
Sorry, my bad. I didn't know I was still on speaker.
Okay. Anyway,
I really didn't.
I
mean for
think
to
this
turn
is a
into debate.
fascinating area for research. And I'd like to get a psychologist involved. And
Let me just say, I think evolutionary psychology is a garbage field.
I agree with you completely. I don't disagree with you on that.
And that
but I will
most of
say that-
a lot of it is just repackaging gender stereotypes under just so stories that pretend to be evolutionary.
I agree completely. We don't disagree on that. Evolutionary psychology is complete garbage, but it makes good stories, and that's why it's popular, because it explains the status quo. Conservatives love it because it explains their conservative belief set. But it's and liberal and the left loves it as well. I mean, it's really bad stuff. But it would be interesting to delve into the actual studies of people who've tried to raise children to the extent that they can with a general gender neutrality, and actually look at the results. And I'm not sure they're quite as clean cut as Jason has presented.
Right?
What's that?
You'd need a whole culture that's aligned with that, and not just like a household that's embedded in a culture that has like these really strong and continually reinforced stereotypes of what it means to be a man or a woman.
Sure. I mean, if you had, you would if you wanted a clean experiment, but hopefully you could derive something from a household level experiment that you could generalize to a culture. So I don't think you could definitively say, but at least you could derive some elements from it. But yeah, you have role models in television, we have role models in art, and there is a certain almost universality to the role models that we have today. And and you could argue it's hard to see how it evolves to that, although I think we're heading there. If we had freedom and if we had the right political, social structures, we would head towards that experiment, because ultimately these things would break down and they'd be role models for both, and slowly, it would take a long time to break it down completely. We would head towards that experiment. And I suspect that at the end of that experiment, there would still be differences. They'd be a lot smaller.
There's some differences, yes.
And
my point of contention is,
I also think there'd be a lot more comfort with whatever differences there are. That is, who cares if there are differences between men and women? I mean, it doesn't bother me to think about a world that says, let's say, and not saying this definitively, that there really is some kind of fundamental difference. Women are more oriented towards X and men are more oriented towards Y for some reason, biological, psychological. Who cares? I mean, that's fine, as long as it's reality, right?
Yeah, well, but and I think my point of
He's just
contention
rolling
is
his
like
eyes, so he's not fine.
taking that.
Well, if all the things that are,
I was speaking.
I'm sorry, I'm being a bad partner.
My point
All
of
right,
contention
Debbie,
is
and
not.
then I have to go to these other questions. Yes.
My point of contention is not that people claim there are some differences. I mean, I think that and certainly on a physiological level, that's like self-evident. That's like, right. But that those differences carry over into things that are of significant moral import, like whether or not someone is independent and oriented towards reality or dependent and oriented towards other people, and whether or not one is capable of leading. Things like that. That's where my beef comes in.
I agree with you completely. I mean, I have no problem with any of that, right? So I don't think women incapable of leading. I mean, that would be absurd. I know amazing women who are leaders. But, this came up in the context of me saying certain people view Trump as masculine. And they do. And they do primarily in more primitive, more backward cultural environments, cultural context. The kind of the macho-driven cultures that if you're loud and obnoxious and physical, even though you're a coward and an idiot, you're considered masculine. But yeah, absolutely, women. Again, I'm challenged by women in the military. We can have that discussion sometime. For a variety of reasons. I think it's very rare that I think women are going to actually be that it's going to be a good idea to put women in combat. But I'm willing to be challenged on that. Partially because of the physical aspect of just the force, and partially because in the culture in which we live, men tend to worry about women, and therefore men tend to be protective of women. And that distracts on the battlefield from what needs to be done. So it becomes a distraction. And now in an ideal society, one day, yeah, I mean, but that we don't live in that world. We live in this world. And in this world, I want to win the war. And I don't want people to die for nothing. And you have to figure out what the best orientation is going to be. But a woman general who can strategize and figure out a battlefield better than any man, absolutely. And motivate. I mean, think about Queen Elizabeth's speech to the British Navy, setting sail to beat the Spaniards. I mean, she gives a great motivating speech and they win. So she could lead.
Thank you. And sorry for putting you on the spot, but this topic's really important, I think. So
I don't like arguing with Jason because he's smarter than me. It's a huge, I'm at a huge disadvantage, which is unusual. Usually,
fight like a woman, Yaron.
Yeah, fight like a woman, exactly. All right, let's see. What do we got? Let's do another round of the super chat, and then we'll go back to a panel. Daniel. Oh, Fred Harper. I didn't see that. Fred Harper. I like hero worship identification, but I think males, females can be either, both, even. I do more hero worshiping than I do heroism, but I also do both. I don't think they are essential characteristics of male, females. Yeah, I mean, this would be a great conversation to have with Ayn Rand, and really try to get a really strong sense of what she means by it and whether she's right about it. She could very well be wrong about it, but it would be good to this would be a great conversation. I'm not sure anybody had it with her, but it would be interesting if somebody did. Daniel, I think the theme of Aladdin is the need for integrity, even in a fantasy world where wishing makes things so. The Disney 2019 remake has a bit more philosophical dialogue than the original. And that's possible. I saw Aladdin in the original Aladdin, 20, 30 years ago? So I don't remember. So I don't know, and I haven't seen the 2019 remake. But I like the Disney movies from that period. I thought they all had good sense of life, but also some positive philosophical themes to them. Okay, Frank says, does anti-war equal pro-surrender? Yeah, usually. If you're really anti-war, that is, I'm not going to war ever, then you're surrendering. to whoever is aggressing against you. Tulsi Gabbard is, well, I mean, she's heading our intelligence forces now. I don't know what for, so she can figure out how to surrender better, to improve her surrenderability. Don't know. Supkaski, a country can't be free unless the women are free. Abdullah Öcalan, the Kurdish socialist, agree or disagree? Yeah, absolutely. How can you have a free country if half the population is not free? Of course not. You know, so yes. And this is a sense in which, you know, sometimes I tell you, there's a sense in which we're freer today in America than we were certainly 200 years ago, because women were not free and blacks were slaves. But even 100 years ago, when blacks were not slaves anymore, but heavily discriminated against by the authorities, and women were still not free. I'm not sure when emancipation actually happened, but for women. But so, yeah, I mean, freedom means freedom for all human beings. So that includes women. Thomas, excessive debt used to be becoming a slave. Now it's bankruptcy forgiveness by the U.S. How would excess debt work in an objectivist society? I mean, I don't know exactly. I'm not just quite as opposed to the current system because there are real penalties. It's not just that you get forgiveness. You know, you also, for some debt, you have to pay it off over time. So they restructure it. They reorganize your debt. You can't borrow money for a long time. Your credit grading goes to hell. So there are real consequences to bankruptcy. And of course, the markets adjust to whatever the law happens to be. I mean, this is the kind of thing that it might be true that you could have different states have slightly different bankruptcy laws. And we could see, you know, I'm not sure that there's one definitive way of doing this. I guess there is a national, I don't know if the bankruptcy law in the U.S., I think, is national. I don't know. I don't think it involves becoming a slave for sure. It probably involves more of, in a sense, docking whatever you make in the future to pay off the debt of the past than we do today, right? So you now have to pay 10% of your salary forever to pay off your debt or something like that if you go bankrupt. That might be part of it. But it's something that has to be worked out by philosophers of law. But look, the ability of businesses and individuals to restructure their debt in bankruptcy, I have to say, has been a huge boon to risk-taking in the United States. So I don't think that is the ultimate criteria, but it is a criteria. Actually how this plays out in the real world is, matters. So I don't have a definitive answer. Philosophers of law will have to really give it some thought, but I'm not as opposed to the current bankruptcy system. It's not my priority. It wouldn't be my priority in terms of the things we need to reform and need to make better. Jacob.
Sorry. So my question was more lighthearted for bucket lists. So I have a bucket list item of skiing on all 6 continents by the time I'm 33. What do you think about bucket lists as a concept? And then do you think people wait too long to start engaging in bucket list activities, where they wait until retirement or wait until they're 70, then try and do everything at the very end?
I mean, I don't know how many people have bucket lists and how they use them. I think what you want is a hierarchy of values. And one of the things in the hierarchy of values could be, I want to visit a lot of interesting places. And then, we could all have different things that fall under that. And when you do the visiting is going to depend on things that are higher up on your hierarchy of values. For example, your career, your marriage or your romantic relationship, your study, things other things that you want to do that you might view more important than travel. I generally think that people don't think enough about what they want, and don't think enough about their hierarchy of values. Don't think about what values are important to them, and how important, relatively speaking, are different values. And they don't think it through, and therefore, if bucket list items or one piece of that hierarchy of values, they don't get to it because generally their values are diminished. So I don't think, and people place a lot of focus on, bucket list became popular, I don't know, a few years ago, and there was a movie called The Bucket List, or maybe it was before that. There was some kind of cultural phenomena about people very old going out and doing crazy things. But it's really a question of what kind of life you want to live. And to what extent do these bucket list items help you live that life? And some things might be, there might be things that you say to yourself, I'm not going to do them when I'm young. I'm going to do them like before I die, like a week before I die, a month before I die. I don't know. I can think of at least one thing that if I was going to do, I wouldn't do now. I would do just before I died or late in life. Things that might involve certain types of risk, things that might involve certain kind of damage that you might not want to take the risk when you're young and or willing to take the risk when you're old. I mean, all of these have to be thought through, and then they have to be thought through in terms of my values and my time on this planet and how I want to live my life and when I want to do what, right? So I don't think there's one fast rule. If you're engaged right now in an important career and you're a CEO of a startup and you're striving to get market share and you want to go public, and you're not going to go to 6 continents next year. It's just not going to happen, right?
Well, to be fair, I'm 29, so I have some years. But do you think bucket lists are a good way to concretize those values?
No,
for me, I was thinking, I want to see different cultures. I want to be immersed in activities I love, and I
don't consider
allocated money towards it because this is my value.
Yeah, but I don't think in terms of bucket lists. I would think of in terms of the values. So I'd like to see more cultures. How important is that to me relative to everything else that I do? It's fairly important. So maybe I can do a culture a year or a country a year or 5 countries a year, whatever it is that you can do. How much money do I have? So you want to take the specifics and then put them into the hierarchy of values and figure out what you want to do. Now, you need rest. You need vacation. Is this part of my vacation strategy over the next few years? This is how I'm going to spend my vacations. So you need to think it through, but I don't think it's helpful to think in terms of bucket lists. I don't exactly, I think it's much more useful to think in terms of values and the relationship between them, how they reinforce each other or not, and how they're integrated, and how hierarchically, what you want to do first, what's more important, how you want to focus your time. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Sure. Adam. Or not. Adam, you're muted if you're talking. All right, let me go to Bruce, and then we'll come back to Adam. Bruce. Bruce, muted too?
Off,
Right,
actually.
Adam's
so,
eating. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, apologies. I've got to drop off, so I will. I thank everybody, and I will see you later.
Sounds good.
So,
thanks, Bruce. Alejandro.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, so I think you answered my question earlier with one of the other questions, but maybe I just wanted to make a comment. I was at the Young American Foundation National Conference the other week, and I think it really demonstrated what you had said. So, for example, you have like 300 students in the room, and it's all like transgender stuff. It's like the most, like there's nothing there, no economics. Maybe you hear the word Milton Friedman like one time in passing, but all the speakers, there was transgender, many lectures on this. There was nothing on foreign policy, nothing. It was, and it's not even that the speakers didn't have views. They just didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
They maybe there was a dispute amongst them, like, do you do this? So they would just focus on this, rile up people and say all these things. So I don't know if you had any comments.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the new right, and this is I've seen this on campuses, and I'm seeing it everywhere. They're not interested in liberty. They're not interested in economics. They're not interested in anything other than kind of the cultural issues and the things that can rile up an audience. And in that sense, they don't want freedom. So what are they going to say if they talk about economics? They don't really have anything really to say. They want to get you excited about the enemy. And notice that all the issues are not issues of a positive agenda. The real positive agenda is probably religion, but they don't want to come across as religious fanatics. So they're not going to actually say our agenda is Christianity, men, boys for Christ or whatever. I don't know what they'll call themselves. So their entire focus is negative. Their entire focus is anti-left, everything the left stands for. And that's all they talk about. And it's constant. And it's all people get riled up. What is a man? What is this kind of stuff that they talk about on the Daily Wire every day. That is what unites them. It's a specific attitude towards the left, and specific attitude towards life that is fundamentally Christian, but they won't admit it.
Well, so actually, there were speakers, even from the Daily Wire. One of the speakers there came over and said, "Oh, the separation of church and state, it's like a made-up concept." There's, and even so, the governor who runs it's the former governor Scott Walker, and he did a lot of good things economically when he was in power. But now he just approved a conference agenda that was saying that was just kind of radical, crazy new right, and it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've predicted that this what would happen to the right, and it's happening. It's happening all around us. So it's sad. And this is Young Americans for Liberty, and liberty is not the issue. They're not interested in liberty.
Young Americans Foundation for Freedom.
Oh, Foundation for Freedom. That's right. Liberty is the other organization. And again, they're not interested in freedom. So it's the same thing. Thanks, Alejandro. Adam.
Okay, I'm sorry I had to step away for a moment.
No problem.
But what I'd like to ask is whether we really can make generalizations on the basis of observing some populations. And it turns out that different populations around the world differ in things like sexual dimorphism. And one very common feature of many historical or history-based Korean TV serials is gender switching, which can be done in Korean just because the Koreans seem to have less physical dimorphism between men and women. And the Korean language also does not have gender. English has very vestigial remnants of gender in the pronouns. And I remember how difficult it was for a Korean to get the English pronouns correctly because they're gendered, and she wasn't used to that. So this is a topic that really belongs to the special sciences, especially including anthropology, both in linguistics and in physical anthropology, and things that depend on the special sciences to that extent really should not be political issues.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely. It's not a political issue. I do agree that it's a scientific question. It's a psychology, anthropology, a combination of observing different cultures around the world and a combination of trying to understand the impact biology has on our psychology. I mean, to me, that's a fascinating question of what is it that, in what way does the way we develop biologically, particularly as children and as adolescents, affect our approach to life, some of our very basic metaphysical value judgments and how we conceive of them. It's something that somebody has to think about. And I think that's a psychological question or a childhood development question. I don't even know what the field is, but these are fascinating issues that we know very little ultimately about kind of this, how human beings develop. Not biologically, we know that, but the interaction between biology and psychology. Debbie.
So I continue to be baffled by the fact that so many objectivists have, I mean, I don't know what percentage, but like some plurality of objectivists, it's non-trivial, have supported Trump in this, in 2016 and again in this year in the election. And I just, he's so wildly, rabidly irrational and nihilistic. It's hard for me to understand like where that's coming from. What, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't get it. If I say that every show, right? Objectivists now don't care about character. They don't care about somebody being honest or dishonest. They don't care about, any character characteristics. They don't care about half of somebody's agenda because, I mean, clearly Trump's agenda, as he said it, is anti-liberty, anti-freedom, anti-capitalist. I think it's a combination of things. One is, objectivists, objectivists. Why are we calling them objectivists necessarily? But people are so committed to the left being evil and bad, which they are, that they're willing to pretty much do anything in order to get rid of that evil, right? And they think, I think that the better people think that, yeah, Trump is bad, but he's not as bad as the left, as they conceive of it. And he too will pass. And at least, he'll do less damage than those left. So it's a oppositional vote. But yeah, I don't understand it in a sense that if you really look at what Trump stands for, and if you look at his character, and you look at the people he surrounds him with, and you look at the political movement he is leading, which is, I think, the most important issue, this guy will destroy this country. And he won't, but he's creating the conditions under which people much worse than him, like J.D. Vance, who I consider much worse than Trump, will destroy this country.
More able to do damage.
Yes, because J.D. Vance is smart. And J.D. Vance is articulate. J.D. Vance doesn't sound like a goon, right? He doesn't sound like a moron like Trump. He actually sounds like an intelligent human being. And yet his ideas, and he believes in something. Trump doesn't believe in anything. J.D. Vance believes in something. And what Trump has done is opened the door wide open to the J.D. Vances of the world, the Josh Hawleys, who I mentioned earlier, of the world, and this guy who he's appointed Secretary of Defense, with Christian tattoos all over the place, and Marco
Kennedy in charge of Health and Human Services.
What's that?
RFK Jr. in charge of Health and Human Services,
Yeah, I mean,
the anti-vax.
RFK Jr. in charge of human services, in a sense, doesn't scare me in this sense. That RFK Jr. in charge of health and human services is just nihilism. That's just, I'm going to break everything. But it doesn't really set up authoritarianism as the outcome. You know, he'll break a bunch of stuff and people will rebel against him and he'll end up being thrown out. Nothing, I don't think long-term that is going to have a huge impact, other than it'll just disrupt all of our lives. And if you're in biotech, of course, it'll disrupt your life and stuff like that. But there's no ideology there, right? There's no I'm going to take over America and do this to America there with RFK. Right. He's just a complete loon.
He's just anti-science.
Who just wants to break stuff and is very anti-science, and it legitimizes anti-science. Granted that. But that'll go away because he'll fail so dramatically. The problem is people who might not fail. Secretary of Defense might not fail. He might actually win a war because he's tough, he's aggressive. But in the name of, he's got the tattoo of, in the name of Christ, in the name of God. You've got people there who are nationalists, and they have a real ideology. They have a program. They know what they want. And, RFK is just a tool to just create havoc so that they can rush in and save the day. So I'm much more concerned about basically the fascists that are there, or people who are going to make fascism tolerable because of their attitudes, who are opening the door and making fascism possible, that really are part of this administration. And this Matt Gaetz, who is Justice Department, he heads the Justice Department. I mean, it's unbelievable, this guy. So he's a clown, and this is he's head of justice. It's really, 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 really scary.
Do you think there's any? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so a lot of stuff will get broken. But more importantly is, the things that get solidified and the things that they're going to be successful with, because that is going to set the terms for what comes next. And I'm much more worried about 8, 12, 16 years from now than I am now. Now it'll be mayhem and craziness, but then it could be real authoritarianism. Then it could be real, we have lost any semblance of freedom.
Do you think there's any hope that the nominally better-ish people who voted for Trump will see how disastrous it is and come around? Or just double down on it?
They didn't see it after 2016 to 2020. I think this time is going to be a lot worse. Trump Part 2 is going to be much worse than Trump Part 1. But they didn't see it after the first time. It didn't see it after January 6th. They didn't see it after all the craziness that he has said and invoked. I don't know. I mean, people become, I've noticed this, on Twitter, which is granted a very specific type of platform, but you cannot criticize anything Trump does. And now anything Elon Musk does. You just cannot. It's like blasphemy. It's like, maybe 100 years ago, if you said something against God, or maybe 300 years ago, if you said something about God, it's like, they come down on you like it's just unbelievable. And that mentality is the mentality of religion. It's the epistemology of authoritarianism, which is the epistemology of religion. And so what we have today is a new religion of the right. We have a prophet. That prophet is Trump. And he is setting up a new world order and or a new American order. And it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty. Hopefully I'm wrong. I don't see where, though.
Well, I hope so too. Thank you.
But so I don't know that those people will come around. And why? I think that one other thing I'll say about objectivists, there is something about objectivists, particularly as they get older, and somebody who's getting significantly older. I can attest to this. A certain frustration develops that we have these ideas, they're true, they should work, but we're making no progress. Hitting a whole, and I think a lot of people, particularly when they get older, in a sense, psychologically give up. They give up on the positive, and all they're left with is fighting the negative. And they just focus on that, but they've basically given up on the positive because they've tried these ideas their entire life. They don't work out there in the world, in terms of politics. So, what the hell? At least let's attack the left because Ayn Rand primarily attacked the left. But it's a form of giving up psychologically and of exhaustion, of fatigue. Fatigue.
I think that's really insightful. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. We've got, I think, 3 super chat questions, and then we'll call it a day. Let's see. Jeremy says, I think people have a hard time not having a positive hope. Yeah, this is the point I just made, I think. So they have a hard time with the left is terrible when coupled with the right is terrible, and project a hope and a fantasy of a right that accomplishes good. Yes, I think that's right. I think the message of they're all bad, nobody likes that message. There has to be an out. Give us some hope. Give us some solution. So, so they latch on to a fantasy of the right that gives them some hope. I mean, these are the better people, of some hope of something good coming out of it. I think that's right, Jeremy. All right, Frank, please talk about McKinley tariff on farmers. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the specific impact McKinley's tariffs had on farmers. I expect it wasn't positive, or it helped some farmers and didn't help other farmers. But McKinley's tariffs were terrible. They were not good economically. They slowed economic growth in the United States. There's a really good article. I think Tyler Cowen published something about this and referenced some academic papers about the McKinley tariffs and about tariffs generally in the 19th century and the harm they did to the U.S. economy. So the U.S. economy grew and became incredibly successful during the 19th century in spite of tariffs, certainly not because of them. And of course, remember the McKinley imposed tariffs when the U.S. government was spending 3% of GDP, not 23% of GDP, or 22 or 21% of GDP. So it's a completely different world. Supicast, I love the consumerist, materialistic, secularist society of America. I'd like to see a party that defends that. Wouldn't we all? Yes, maybe one day. All right, guys, have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you to our panelists. Thanks, Debbie, Adam, and Alejandro for sticking around. And I will see you all tomorrow, I think. Yes, tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Did you miss Adam's last question?
Which Adam last question? No, Adam asked. I got everybody the last round. Just before Debbie. Tomorrow we have 2 shows. I'm interviewing Zubrin. He's head of the Mars Society. He's going to tell us why we should care about going to Mars and what his vision for a Mars colony looks like. I don't know if we'll get into Trump, but he hates Trump. I mean, he's just unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, he's not an objectivist, and he despises Trump. He's one of the best people on Twitter when it comes to Trump. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit. Even though I'm assuming he's a Elon fan, so because of Mars. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about Elon Musk and SpaceX at the same time. He's also got a lot of experience with nuclear energy, so we'll talk about that as well. So that should be fun. That's tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. East Coast time. But we'll do our news roundup at 2 p.m. East Coast time tomorrow. I will see you all then. Have a great weekend. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.